here today with Wade Tower from Sandler Training. He's a consultant, coach, and trainer in all sorts of areas, mainly sales, management, customer service, and leadership development, which is obvious a thing we can all use. With Sandler, who is probably one of the most preeminent sales training organizations in the country. And Wade is here with Oklahoma City, and there's some information on there on how to find him and connect with him, because I know you'll want to. But let's go ahead and turn this over to Wade, and let's learn about selling in the time of Corona.
Yeah, COVID selling.
COVID selling.
Sells itself, actually. So I appreciate you for having me, for one. It's an honor to be here. And I know we've done this a little bit already. I don't think I've spoken to Cecilia, but I know that Al used to be with the Postal Service. And Al, tell me your company one more time.
Alexander Elite Fashions is my store.
Alexander Elite Fashions. I love it.
There is an interview with him on our website if you're interested.
Okay. Cecil, do you still work? Or are you like solely?
No, I retired about 4 years ago, and after 45 years, I thought that was enough time in the
Plenty.
pension. Well, I've got grandchildren, and my wife retired. So.
Oh, look at that! Good for you. And Cecilia, is it Cecilia or Cecilia?
Celia.
Celia.
Cecilia.
Okay, I was saying it right. Look at me.
You were.
I always spell it wrong.
Yes, you do.
I see it right there. So, Cecilia.
I retired from Chesapeake about 7 years ago. When they made me an offer, I absolutely couldn't refuse.
And you got out while the getting was good.
I did.
And Jerry's here, sort of.
Yeah.
I was the phone guy. They were registered. I got dropped and I'm back on again.
Gotcha. So Jerry, what do you do or did for a living? Have done?
My association with SCORE, my background, that would be that I owned a management marketing consulting firm for about 20 years. And I've been self-employed for probably 50 years in various organizations and stuff. And then I do a lot of, been on a lot of a board of directors and do a lot of work with not-for-profits.
Gotcha. Good for you. Okay, well, I got that. Everybody knows each other obviously better than you know me. So I'll give you a brief introduction. I'm Wade Tower. I work for Sandler Training. Grew up in Oklahoma. I grew up in Stillwater. Went to Oklahoma State University, but I also went to OU for a couple of years. So I've been to both, although I would say I'm a bigger Cowboy fan than Sooner fan, which is not as easy as it is to be a Sooner fan at times. I worked with my father. He was a small business owner for my whole life growing up. And when I got out of school, I worked with him for about 11 years. And then decided I wanted to go make my own way. And so I went and did financial services for a decade. And after I left that, I ended up with an employer in 2012 and 2013 that after I had been selling for 25 years of my life, he said, "Hey, Wade, I really want you to go sales training." And I was like, well, the question is why this talk now, right? Why are we talking about sales? Why are we talking about sales in a pandemic? And I would say this about sales. Everybody thinks that sales is one thing. It's a certain thing. It's a certain way of doing things. It's a certain relationship. And as we talk about sales in the next few minutes, I'll ask you this. I'll ask, and I ask my classes this all the time. What's it feel like to be wrong? And you guys can unmute yourselves because I'm going to ask you questions during this talk. This is going to be more interactive maybe than previous. But does anybody want to tell me what it feels like when they're wrong?
Normal.
That's at home with my wife.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, it kind of depends on what I'm wrong about. So if I'm just make a wrong decision in the business, that's just a learning moment.
Correct.
If I make a wrong decision with my wife, that's more dangerous. So
Well,
why I'm wrong.
And it's here's the deal. The answers you guys gave me are comical, but also true. Most people would say, they say embarrassed, or they say, you know, humiliated. But the reality is that's what being wrong feels like once you know you're wrong. But before you know you're wrong, when you're wrong, it feels like you're right. But you just don't know it yet that you're wrong.
Hmm.
And I look at it from the standpoint, will I be able to rebound from my wrong?
Oh, that's
Be- Because some, you know, let's say if I had a new customer to walk in and I get it wrong, that customer may not come back.
that's true. And you know as well as I do, and we'll talk about this a little bit, being wrong relationally with your customers is obviously not where you want to be. And so what we're going to talk about here is what if, right? What if we sort of look at what we're doing and how we're doing and how we think about sales, and what if we sort of stretch ourselves and what we think about and we change our mindset? And you all are all experienced enough to know the value of mindset. Some of these statistics and things I throw out, you will probably already be aware of, but the average person thinks about 70,000 thoughts every single day. So 70,000 thoughts, and the key to that is obviously focusing on the handful that are going to make the most sense and are going to make the biggest change in your life. And as we think about sales and we think about relationships and we think about reaching out to people, in Sandler, we're very big on something called the belief wheel. And anybody, and you can show me by hands, anybody familiar with the belief wheel at all? Have you ever seen this before? No. So the belief wheel is essentially what you do with the thoughts that you have and the beliefs that you have. And obviously it starts there in the middle where it says beliefs, and you have a belief about something. And from that belief, you make a judgment based on how you believe. And based on your judgment, you're going to either take action on that judgment or non-action. And then that's going to give you results, and that's going to reinforce the belief you have. So in the sales world, you know, a lot of things that we talk about are, say, cold calls or warm calls, or, you know, doing things that you don't normally do. And if you have a belief that cold calls don't work, then you're going to have a judgment and you're going to say, well, I don't think they work, and I don't think they ever work, and they're not going to work for me. And then by believing that judgment, you're not going to do them. And so you're not going to get any sales. That's going to be the result from that. And that's just going to reinforce your belief that cold calls don't work. And so you get stuck in this ugly cycle of beliefs and judgment, of non-action. And it only takes less than a second for any of that to happen. And as adults with adult learning, what happens is every time you get information from someone, whether it's a coworker or a customer or a friend or a family member, you do one of three things with that information. And there's really only three things you can do with that information. You can embrace it, which obviously simply means somebody shares an idea with you and you go, oh my gosh, that's a fabulous idea. I'd love to do that. I think I'm going to start doing that today. And so you make it a part of your life and you use it and you do it. You can blend it with the information you have. You can say, okay, well, I like the idea, but I don't like all of it. You know, half of that makes sense to me. So I think, you know, I'll put that into action and I'll make that a part of my life. Or you can defend. And when you defend, you essentially say, I don't believe that. I don't think that has value. I'm not sure that fits into what I'm doing for my life. And a Harvard study years ago told us that one of those is used much more than the others. Anybody have a guess which one we do the most often?
Just defend.
You would be correct. So
Set my ways. Yeah.
60 to 90% of the time when you hear new information, you defend against it emotionally and mentally.
Sandra, a question is that one, especially, but also 1 and 2 can end up changing your belief, correct?
Sure. No, absolutely.
So a belief doesn't stay. I mean, you can change your belief. if
Oh,
you
no,
want.
no, absolutely. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I mean, I'm a huge believer that you can change. Obviously, you can change your beliefs, you can change, how you do things, you can change your personality. But the reality is most of us stay so emotionally inflexible
Mhm.
that we don't. And that's one of the keys to to being a successful salesperson. If you've got to take in new information and you've got to adapt to it. Mike, the gentleman I work for, Mike Crandall, always says whenever we give our workshops that somebody told him years ago, he visited another Sandler office when he was first starting, and he sat next to a gentleman that had a crane rental company, okay, of all things. And that gentleman had been coming to the Sandler class in that city for 24 years. And Mike had just started in the business. And so of course he's curious, and he's like, hey, I've got to ask you, what makes you want to come to class every week for 24 years? And the gentleman said, well, he goes, the reality is one idea can change my entire life or my business if I put it to good use. And he said, I'm not going to come across those ideas if I'm not in a room where I hear those ideas. And this is one of those rooms where I hear new ideas every week. So that's kind of how we look at it at Sandler is we hope that you're open to things. You all know a lot of this because you all have as much experience as most people in business, but essentially there's 3 parts to a business. Most of us all know that even though there may be several, if not tens, sometimes in some businesses, more than that, hundreds parts of a business, they all come down to 3 things, essentially. Selling what you do, which is the sales department, delivering what you sell, and then the back end and the operations and the administration. Al knows this, right? I mean, you got selling the clothes and talking to customers. Then you got to make sure they get tailored and they get taken care of and hemmed exactly right. And then you got all the paperwork and the accounting and the bookkeeping and all that exciting stuff that has to happen. And I'm sure you all are going to know the right answer to this question, but which would you say is the most important of those 3?
I would say 2.
Okay, well, and 2 was delivering what you sell.
Mhm.
Anybody else have a guess? That's a good answer.
I would say 1, because if you don't do 1, there's no need for the other 2.
Ding, ding, ding.
That's what I was gonna say.
That's right. Jerry hit it right on the head. Because the reality is until something's sold, right, nothing else really needs to happen. You can't deliver it until it's sold. You don't need to do accounting for something until you've got numbers to account for. And we look at it and we explain it to our customers ourselves and our prospects as, if every department of a business is a train, you've got accounting and you've got bookkeeping and you've got manufacturing and you've got management and you've got human resources and you've got sales. There's really only one car that can be the engine of that train, and that's sales. All of the other cars don't really have the fuel to pull everybody else around. So without the sales, nothing else happens and the train's not going anywhere. And ironically, or not ironically, which of those cars, quote unquote, on our train is most impacted by COVID and the pandemic? And that would be sales, because it changed the way, as we were just talking about, that we do everything. I'm sure Al has fewer folks wandering in the store, just browsing these days. Correct?
That is correct.
Yep. We don't have networking cocktail hours anymore. We don't have trade shows anymore for the most part. So now when sales used to depend on handshakes and get-togethers and grabbing a cup of coffee or meeting at a coffee shop, now it's Zoom and fist bumps. And those are rare. So the main question becomes, how do we get the same results in a completely different environment? And I will tell you that going through the steps that we're going to go through here in the next few minutes, many of our clients, and some it's dependent on the industry, of course, but many of our clients are having better years than they've ever had in a year when they weren't sure they were going to have any business. So you guys, any of you have a pen and paper handy in front of you? Place to make notes? So if you'll write down these 5 letters in a vertical, it's an acronym: A, K, A, S, H. So it essentially spells A cash. So the key issues essentially are the A stands for awareness. So you've got to have an awareness of obviously what you need to fix, what's not working for your business, why aren't sales where you want them to be. And with adult learners, most are smart enough and have enough common sense that they go, okay, if I've got an awareness and this is not working, I need to get some knowledge that I don't have. So that K stands for knowledge. So they will go and they will attend a workshop, or they will watch a video on YouTube, or they'll read a book, or they'll listen to a podcast. And then if you'll draw a really hard line underneath that K, between the K and the A, the second A, the sad fact is that is where most people stop. Is they get an awareness and they say, man, I really need to fix that. Things aren't going like they should be. Where can I fix that? So they buy a book and they read it and they make a few notes and they go, man, that's good information. I could use that. And then they put it on their desk or they put it on their shelf and they never use it again. And they don't use it because it takes time. So the next letter, the A, awareness, knowledge, application. Oh, Al's got a customer. And so if you have the knowledge, you gotta apply it. And if you apply it and you do it long enough, it becomes a skill, which is that next letter, the S. And if you spend enough time with that skill and you do it long enough and often enough, it becomes a habit. And the big difference between a skill and a habit is a skill is something you can do and you're good at, but you have to think about it in order to do it. A habit is when it just subconsciously happens every time you get in that situation. And that's what we want with our clients. And that's what we want with the people that we work with, is we want you to have a sales system and a process that becomes automatic so you don't have to think about it anymore. When you look at this list, we talk about not understanding awareness, not learning knowledge, old thinking, the sales reality gap, follow-up, and wrong goals. You know, the sales reality gap, I'll touch on that briefly. We'll work with clients, and what we'll do is we'll do a sales funnel analysis with clients. And we'll say, okay, bring in your sales team and let's write down on a whiteboard what you have in your sales funnel. And so we'll write down, what people have in their sales funnel. This person's thinking about it. This person's checking on these things. And most of the time we can cut that number easily in half, because salespeople are optimists, right? Salespeople talk to somebody and they say, well, yeah, I'm thinking about that. And the problem is interest does not equal a sale. So a lot of people are just looking for free information. They're looking for free consulting. And so, but the poor salespeople are like, no, I'm putting that person down. I spent 2 hours, talking to them. I spent 4 hours putting this presentation together, and it's sitting on their desk and they're not getting back to me. But we're going to be able to spend that someday. Well, that's probably not the case. And at Sandler, we'd much rather hear a no than a maybe. Because if you're going to tell me no, I'd rather you tell me today than 6 months from now. And the reality is you'd probably rather tell me no than 6 months from now, because then you don't have to mess with my phone calls chasing you down. So the other thing on this slide that I'll mention is wrong goals. A lot of companies have sales goals and they have numbers they want to hit, and that's obviously valuable and important. But the other side to that is when you break down that sales goal and those numbers, especially in this environment, have you broken down goals on everybody on the team's going to know how to leave a voicemail that gets a return call? Is that a goal? Do you have a goal that says, I want everybody's LinkedIn profile to match exactly what the company goals are? And I want everybody's Zoom profile and their name and their picture and everything on Zoom to match what we want our presence to be out in the world and in the sales world, just like if they were out in their car driving around. Are those goals that you have? Because without breaking down to those little goals, we all know those big goals aren't going to happen.
So you're talking about the last part there of basically everybody's on the same brand.
That's exactly right, says the marketing guy. No, that's exactly right. You want to make sure it's amazing as we talk to people, how many people don't have just the most basic things with their online sales presence lined up and on point. You know, we've dealt with some larger companies, and the majority of people that you talk to in this day and age in a business to business world will definitely look at your LinkedIn profile before they have a meeting with you. And if they don't like what they see, then you're not going to have that meeting, because they realize if you don't have a presence online and your LinkedIn profile is not serious, then they realize it's kind of like walking into a messy office. Just gives you a bad feeling. And especially when all of the other competitors that you have may have very cleaned up, tidy LinkedIn profiles, you do not want to be the person that doesn't do that. One of the other things we run into a lot is not having company email accounts. Sometimes small businesses, you know, when you're setting up, it's, and I get it, it's easy. But you know, we met with an attorney not too long ago, and he was talking to us about doing some business together. And we were asking him, and we asked a lot of questions at Sandler, and we said, you know, what do you want to charge? And he was telling us, and it was hundreds of dollars an hour, and that's fine. And he gave us his email account, and it was a Gmail account. And the first thing we told him was, nobody's ever going to pay you $300 an hour if you give them a Gmail email address, because you look
Thank
like
you. That was one of my biggest and hardest campaigns within my own organization. Was
oh,
getting people to realize that very thing.
because it matters, right? How you present yourself, your presence out in this world, especially in this pandemic, how you look online and how you present yourself. If I give somebody a Gmail account and I work for Sandler, it looks like I'm selling Sandler out of my closet. And so you don't want that. So the first step as far as sales is redefining sales and next level thinking as far as sales go. At Sandler, one of the things that we focus on is sales is not selling somebody to make a sale. Sales is not selling something to make money for us. The reason that you make a sale is because people are in some sort of pain, and you're able to provide a solution to get them out of that pain. And they're not going to spend that money, and they're not going to make that decision unless they are either aware of their pain enough to the point, or they are uncomfortable enough with their pain, because people make purchases, and Al's going to know this, people make purchases emotionally, and then they justify them intellectually. So, you know, the reason people look at salespeople the way they do, even if you go to Webster's dictionary, the archaic definition of sale is to trick or to deceive. And people wonder why people look at salesmen cross-eyed. It's because there's a lot of salespeople out there that don't know what they're doing. And every time that somebody walks into Al's store to buy a suit, Al's not competing against himself. He's competing against the last 3 stores that those people went in that they got ignored at, or the person didn't know what they were doing, or they didn't know sizes, and they expect Al to be exactly the same way. And so he's got to overcome that obstacle that he didn't even create for himself. So
The first thing you have to sell is not a product, but yourself and your business. What are your company?
no, that is exactly right. And the old adage, and you guys can all answer this, you can all answer this cliche. It's not how you say what you say. And no, it's not what you say, it's
How you say it.
that's exactly right.
It's the old
And
adage that people love to buy, but they hate to be sold.
that's exactly right. And so it's not what you sell necessarily, but it's how you sell it. And it's how you make that person feel. And so what we try to work with our companies that we work with is we want them to understand the buyer side of things. So when you talk to a prospect, we want you in the entire conversation to seek to understand what they are trying to accomplish. Because people buy for their own reasons, not for the salesman's reasons. So as we look at that and we do that, we say, okay, well, how can you do that? How do you understand what they're doing? And that is simply to have a sales system. We don't, when we talked about the different areas of a business earlier, we talked about accounting, we talked about manufacturing, we talked about human resources. Every area of a business typically has a system, and they have a process for how they do things and how they manage data. And most companies that we talk to, we say, well, what's your sales system? And they go, what do you mean? What's our sales system? We just hire people that are good with people, and then we give them a order pad and we send them out on their way. Okay, well, that's a system, I guess. It's not a good system. And what we try to show people, whether it's our system or not, the Sandler system, obviously I'm fond of, but we just want you to have a system, have a process for every single person that you talk to. And when you do that, and when you have a system and a process, it takes a lot of the stress out because you know what you're going to do. You understand what your next step is, so you don't have to really think about what you're going to say next or what you're going to do next or how you're going to do it. And then when they get to the end and the prospect makes a decision, you can be okay with a yes and you can be okay with a no, but we don't really want you to be okay with a maybe. And as in Oklahoma, what we found is maybe is a really nice way to say no. But I would much rather hear it today than not. Whenever we talk about our sales system, we talk about asking questions. And typically in the buyer seller dance, which is what we call it, the buyer with a salesman that doesn't have a system, the buyer controls the dance and they're leading, because the buyer comes in and asks for information and the salesman throws up all over him and says, oh yeah, this is what I got. This is what I got. And then the person thinks about it and they go, oh, well, I'm not really sure. And then the salesman gives them all their features and benefits, tries to overcome objections. And then that person says, well, I don't know, maybe. And then they sort of, let me think about it. And then they disappear. And then it becomes a game of chase. And so who's controlling that entire system?
One of the things in those systems, I understand there's actually two, what I would call types of salesmen. There's a salesman, and a salesman sells a product, and most of his stuff is by rote. He doesn't make any contact with his client. He just goes through the sales pitch, if you will.
Correct.
And success is not, his closing success is very, very low. Then you have what I call a professional salesman. And a professional salesman, he goes for a close. He knows when the time is because he's made that close contact with the customer. He knows kind of what they're after and what they want, and what they're afraid of, and like you said, what is it that they're hurting, and how can his product solve that dilemma they're having. That's a professional salesman, and one of the things they do is they know how to close. They don't, and maybe like you said, it's not a close.
Right. No. And I would agree with everything you said. I would say the difference with what we do is, like you said, we don't, that it's that old stereotype of always be closing, always be closing. And with the way that we approach people, we want our prospects to come to the decision that they want to buy before we ask them about it.
Yep.
And if we do our job right, that's what happens. Because selling should be conversational, not confrontational. It's literally just two people having a conversation. And if you understand how to ask the right questions and you listen 70% of the time and you talk 30% of the time, then you're probably going to get to a resolution that makes sense. And whether that resolution is they don't need to buy anything or they do buy something, you ultimately have to be more concerned about what's best for the prospect than what's best for you. And so we want people that work with us as a salesperson. And Jerry, you're going to, I know, agree with this. Most, as you said a second ago, the first type of salesperson wants to give and wants to present and wants to talk. And a professional salesperson wants to gather all the information they can gather. They want to find out what's going on. They want to find out how they can help. They want to find out what's wrong. And I keep using Al as an example, and I hope that's okay with you, Al. But, you know, when somebody comes in and you know, they're looking for a suit for a wedding or for a funeral or for a big party or, you know, they've gotten a new job or they want to go for an interview. If Al doesn't find out what that suit's for or for that event or what they're looking for, he's not going to be able to help them. And they're going to know that. And they're obviously going to sense that because it's going to be about Al and not about them. And not that Al would do that, but so have a system. I would say have an ideal client profile. You know, when people go into sales and they say, oh, I'm going to sell this, this is good for everybody. Well, there's very few items that are really good for everybody. And a lot of businesses waste a lot of time trying to market, and Jerry, you're going to know this better than I do probably, trying to market to everyone when the reality is they could save themselves a lot of time and a lot of money by deciding who they want to sell with, who they want to work with, narrowing that focus down, and then going after that demographic and those people.
Yeah, because without that, your marketing is a waste of time and possibly money, depending upon what you're doing. You're right.
No, I appreciate you saying that because, and would you agree with this, Jerry, that most companies don't take the time to decide who their ideal client is?
Right. When I'm doing a consult, I give people two questions, and I give them 3 or 4 days to deal with the question. The first question is what is your product or service? In other words, what do you do that nobody else does? How do you do it? What's your corporate stance on this and your, mission statement, all that other stuff. What is the service or product you sell? The second question is who are your clients? Tell me everything you know about them. What's your socioeconomic status? Where do they live at? What periodicals they read? What organizations they belong to? So you have to, and this is your client profile, if you will. And so then what happens is now you've got your brand, which was the answer to the first question. And the second question is now who do you think would be interested in your brand? And how do I get hold of them?
Right. Yep. And so I'll just transition straight from what you said to this is the next step for us is we go to CARE, which is another acronym, which stands for keep, attain, recapture, and expand. And I can't see her in my screen. Oh, there she is, Cecilia. I'm sorry. I haven't been able to see your lovely blonde hair there. So, okay. So keep, attain, recapture, expand. And as Jerry was just saying, so when you look at your customers and you look at your prospects, you need to be intentional. So you need to decide who do we want to keep? You may have customers that cost you more money than you make. And there's always this fear of, I don't want to get rid of any customers. They could turn into something great. Well, you want to be in business when that time comes. So sometimes you just need to cut people loose. Who do you want to attain? Which is exactly what Jerry was saying. Who's your ideal client profile? So who do you want to go after and who do you want to get? And who do you want to recapture? Who has been a customer who you don't see as often anymore that would be a good customer of yours if they could come back? So how can you get them re-engaged and get them back back in the fold. And then expand. You may have customers that do a little bit of business with you, but you know that there's more business there to be had. So how do you touch base with them and how do you make that business bigger and stronger? There's some companies or some folks that you do all the business you can do with them and you know that, but there's some that they may be able to expand. And when we say expand, we also mean you can use those existing clients that already like you to get referrals and ask for other customers. And that's one thing that people are notoriously bad about, is asking for a referral from somebody that already likes them and already cares about them. But it's just hard to ask that question sometimes. So what we try to do is we try to make it easy. Try to make engagement with your company or your organization as simple as possible for the customer, because at the end of the day, it's about them. So we see that all the time with all the huge companies, right? We see it with Amazon, and it seems like every day, Al, and you know this, the large brick and mortar folks are going more and more online, and they're trying to compete with Walmart and Amazon. And so Nordstrom and Saks and all those companies are doing what they can. We can do that online, but I think the benefit that the businesses have in Oklahoma is Oklahoma's essentially, I like to say this, and some folks don't like it, but it's essentially one big small town, right? It's a state with not a lot of people in it. We all are somewhat similar. We all have somewhat similar beliefs and values, and we like to do business with our neighbors. And so I think the secret is to have enough presence online. You don't have to go spend a gob of money on a fancy website or, make shipping, automated and all those things that these gigantic companies can do, but just have a presence have a website that makes sense, that has some buttons that they can press one time and get to your products and order what you want. Have a LinkedIn, have a Facebook page, things that don't cost any money, but it keeps you in their vision and keeps you, quote unquote, engaged. As we talk about all these different things that you can do, number 7 is BAT, behavior, attitude, and technique. So we focus on the things that we can control when we sell. So when I talk to a customer and I say, okay, well, what's your goal for this sales call? What outcome do you want? And more often than not, from new salespeople, they say, well, I want to make a sale. And I go, well, that's not up to you. You can't control that. You can control your behavior and your attitude and your technique. But the reality is the prospect is always the one that gets to control whether or not they buy something. And so what we say at Sandler is we say prospects can control the decision and they can make the decision, but we're going to control the process. So we're going to go through a process where we control how we do things and what steps we go through and how we feel about those steps and those processes. So whereas most sales training will focus 90% on technique and on presentation and overcoming obstacles, at Sandler, we probably spend 85 or 90% of our time on behavior and attitude because we know that's what's going to drive the technique. I don't know, any of you baseball fans? Yes, Jay? Cecilia? Yes? No? Okay. Well, we use an example as a batting average, and I'll go through these because I know numbers online and on Zoom it can be confusing. But if you've got a pro baseball player and they hit 5 out of 20 hits, then their batting average is what? 250, right? Get a 250 batting average. That's fine. It's good. You can play Major League Baseball. You can be in the starting lineup, but you're probably not going to be super famous. But if you hit 6 out of 20, then your batting average jumps to 300. And if you've been around baseball for any amount of time at all, if you bat 300, you're probably going to be in the Hall of Fame. You're probably going to be an all-star. You're probably going to have shoes with your name on them. And the amazing thing about that is it's one more hit. One more hit. And the reality is it's the same stadium, it's the same pitcher, it's the same field, it's the same uniform, same ball. And the only thing that's different is how that one guy prepared different than the other guy. Did he do more work? Did he spend more time focusing on hitting rather than catching? Who knows? But he controlled the one thing that mattered, which was his behavior and his attitude. And then that changed his technique. So it's one more hit. And the thing that kills me about sales is you see people that focus on all these things. You see athletes that have coaches, and you see celebrities that spend all this time learning, different techniques to do things on the screen. And you've got engineers and you've got doctors and they all have all of this work and all of this effort that they put in. And then you go to salespeople and you say, well, how much time did you spend, kind of honing your craft this year? And they go, well, none. And it reminds me a little bit, Conor McGregor, the fighter, MMA fighter. I saw an interview with him, and he travels now. Now, granted, he's made a lot of money in the last few years, but when he travels now, he travels with a chef and a chiropractor and a masseuse and his workout specialist. And they go with him everywhere he goes. And the interviewer said, why in the world would you do that? And he said, I make my living with my body. And I saw LeBron James interviewed, and LeBron James said that he spent $1 million a year just on his health. And he said, I asked my accountant and I said, wait a second, how much did I spend on my health last year? And he said, nothing. He said, I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense at all. So he said, I decided I would get serious about my life and I would do what I needed to do. And I would spend whatever I had to spend to stay in the shape I need to stay in. And that's what he does. And at the same time, all of us on this Zoom call, for the most part, whether it's thinking or labor or whatever it is, we make our living with our bodies. And we make our living with our sales and with our technique. And so why don't we spend some of the same time and effort to do that and focus on sales?
And I really like that, though, because I was a fencing master. My sport was fencing. And we've learned in fencing actually quite some time ago, because everybody early on, we taught us a coach technique. We were looking for the perfect technique. And by the way, technique is the easiest of all things to teach. And it's the easiest of all things to learn. But what we found out was the people who won, who were the champions, who were Olympians and stuff like that, sometimes their technique was not the prettiest in the world, but they had the attitude. They were intelligent, and they knew how to take whatever technique they had and apply it correctly. So I really like that, where the behavior and the attitude actually will end up creating the technique, because you can have the technique, but if you don't have those other two, it's useless to you.
You are exactly, that's right. And the interesting thing is I worked for a lot of big companies. I worked for New York Life, and I worked for Mass Mutual, and I worked for Allstate, and I worked for a big software company, SolidWorks, and all of the training that I had with those companies was about product and about how to present the products.
Yeah.
Nobody ever said to me, well, Wade, what's your tonality like whenever you leave a voicemail? What? What's my what? And how you speak and how you say certain things matters a whole lot more than you telling them another fact that they don't really probably want to know anyway. So if you go to Jerry, I appreciate that. I mean, that's so true. So if you go to, I bet you like that new Geico ad have you seen that with the fencers on it?
Oh yeah. They're not fencing, but yeah, it's at least they're wearing the uniform.
Well, for the rest of us, it looks like they're fencing, but I get it. I totally understand. And again, Jerry, you're going to know this, and we won't spend very long on this, but you got to align your sales and marketing, right? It's not going to make sense if you're putting stuff out on the internet and a certain feel and a certain message, and then when people come into your store and you don't even know or mention what is online that week. And we see that a lot. And in bigger companies, the marketing team and the sales team aren't really hugely connected, which amazes me.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have one message and one thing, then you're going to confuse people, and it's going to make them uncomfortable, and they're going to leave. Prospecting, right? Always and everything. Nobody likes to. It's not fun. Nobody says, man, I love to call people that didn't ask me to call them. But the reality is you have to do it. I told a story yesterday in class that I called a gentleman years ago when I was selling life insurance, and his wife was really, really sick at the time. She had cancer, and they had kids, and they were going through a bad time. And I really called him because I wanted to talk to him about financial products, because I knew they were having some issues and I didn't know how situated they were. And so I made the phone call that I didn't really want to make. And we got on the phone, and it was a buddy that I knew from church. And once we got on the phone, he just proceeded to talk and talk and talk. And he just kind of just vented on the phone with me. So much so that we were on the phone for about 30 minutes, and I never got around to saying what I was going to say about my product I wanted to mention. And so I hung up the phone, and I thought, well, okay, that didn't go as planned, but it was great to talk to him. And I didn't really think about it again. And about a year later, after his wife had been cured of cancer and she was totally great and super healthy, they were given their testimony in front of the church about going through that chapter in their lives and about how they went through it. And unbeknownst to me, he got to a point in his talk and he said, one of the darkest days I had, I was feeling sorry for myself, and Wade called me out of the blue and just let me talk for 30 minutes. And he said that conversation is one of the things that got me through that day. And he said, proceeded to get me through the rest of that week and the rest of that month. And he said, so I will always be grateful to Wade for that phone call. Well, I didn't even know I did it, right? I can't take credit, really. I think that's probably God's timing and how things work out. But the moral to the story for me is I would have never made that phone call if it weren't for business. So businesses give us an opportunity to interact with people and have conversations with people that we wouldn't have otherwise. And we can't know what they're going through or what they're going through in life or what they're dealing with. But especially in this day and age with the pandemic, having a conversation with a person and connecting with another person and knowing that somebody actually cares enough to reach out to you has an impact on people. So if you do it right and you make the phone call and you ask how they're doing instead of jumping into your sales pitch, you can make a huge change in somebody's life. And I know I need to wrap this up. We're running low on time, but the key is, right, plan, prepare, and practice. Plan, prepare, and practice. It's true with everything else you do in life, but most people don't do it with sales for some reason. There's some other keys that you can do. You can have a sales playbook. You can have a prospecting cookbook, a pre-brief process and debrief process. I'll give you these last two little quick stories and then we'll be done. And Jay, I apologize for running right up next to time.
Not a problem.
But if you go to Top Gun, right? Everybody remembers the movie Top Gun. But if you go to Top Gun out in Miramar, California, where they train the fighter pilots, top fighter pilots, they do a pre-brief process before the dog fights, and it takes about 30 minutes. And they tell them what they're going to do, and they tell them where they're going to fly and what kind of fight and who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. And they have their fight and they do it. And typically a dog fight lasts anywhere from 3 to 7 minutes in the air. And then they come back and land. And when they land, they have a debrief. And the debrief equals about 45 minutes for every minute that they're in the air fighting. So the pre-brief is 30 minutes. Hey, get up there and start fighting each other. Here's what you're going to do. The debrief is several hours discussing literally 5 minutes. And when we talk to our customers and our clients and we say, hey, tell me about the debrief process and the pre-brief process about your sales calls. Well, I may as well be speaking Portuguese, because they go, what do you mean we don't do that? So you don't analyze what you said and how you said and if it worked and whether or not it worked and why it worked or didn't work. And it seems so basic, and yet people don't do it. Those are the 9 things that we talked about. Redefine sales, understand your buyers, have a sales system, ideal client profile, care, make it easy, behavior, attitude, and technique, align your sales and marketing and prospecting. That's my information. The one piece that I would say to folks, to give you like a snippet that you can use, has anybody ever heard of an upfront contract? No, yes, maybe.
Heard of it, can't remember what it was.
Yeah, one of the things
Thanks
that
for
we
the-
use a lot with Sandler, and we recommend that everybody use with meetings, is when you make an appointment with somebody, do a few basic things that will change the entire tone of the meeting. When you call and you say, hey Cecil, we talked, if you're okay meeting at 10 tomorrow morning, I think an hour is probably plenty. Would you agree with that? So I'm going to mark down 10 to 11, and by 11 o'clock we'll be done. Now, can you tell me exactly what it is you wanted to talk about at our meeting? What areas you wanted me to cover, and make sure I answer those questions? And so Cecil's going to tell me that. So he's going to tell me exactly what he's looking for. And I'm going to say, well, Cecil, I'll answer those questions. And then I'd also like to share this, if that's okay with you. And I will see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And then when I show up at 10 o'clock, I'm going to say, hey, Cecil, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here. I blocked off an hour. And if an hour is still okay with you, is that what we had planned? Does that still work for your schedule? He's going to say yes. I'm going to say, tell me one more time what it is you wanted me to cover, and make sure if you thought of something between yesterday and today, that if you thought of something else you wanted me a question to answer, and he's going to tell me. And I'm going to tell him what I want to cover. And then I'm going to say probably the most important part, which is I'm going to say, okay, Cecil, I tell you what, just do me one favor. As we have this conversation for the next hour, if we get to a point where you don't think this is a good fit, or you don't think that I can solve your problem for you, will you just stop me and just tell me? Because if you get to that point before I realize it, I would much rather you just tell me no and say, hey, Wade, I don't think this is going to work for us, and I will gather my stuff and let you get back to your day. If, on the other hand, we get to a place where you think, okay, you know what, this makes sense, I can see this working for us, then you and I will decide on next steps, and we'll decide what that's going to look like, and we'll make that decision. And if we get all the way to the end and you still say, well, you know what, Wade, let me think about it, or maybe, honestly, Cecil, I think that's a polite way to say no. And if that's the case, I would much rather you just say no than tell me maybe. So when we get to the end of this hour, are you comfortable either telling me, hey, let's look at next steps and let's talk about what's going to happen next, or just no? And will you just not tell me maybe? Is that fair? And then that's what happens.